got to get one of these for home. Ooh. All right. Good afternoon, everybody. Glad you're here. Nice to see everybody. Got a few brave ones in the front row. Thank you. It's my pleasure. Hey, Dan. Hello to everybody out in the field, too. Hopefully we have lots of folks calling in from the field because we have a special guest today. It's Rebecca Wodder. It's so nice to have you here. Thank you for joining us and taking time out of your busy schedule. Rebecca's
the invitation.
Absolutely. Rebecca's actually here for the Fish Passage Conference. It's an international conference. I think it's the second annual one being held at UMass all week. And Rebecca's been asked to be the plenary speaker tomorrow morning. So we capitalized on your visit and asked if you wouldn't mind coming to talk to us a little bit here in Region 5. Rebecca is the special counsel, special advisor to Secretary Salazar on the America's Great Outdoors with a special focus on rivers and the Rivers Initiative. So Rebecca's here to talk to us a little bit about what's going on in the Secretary's corridor on all of these initiatives and has been doing fantastic work on that. So I'm looking forward to having that dialogue with all of you and learning more about the Rivers Initiative. Come on in, everybody. There's seats, plenty of seats. And speaking of the River Initiative, we have 13 of the 51 that are nationally being talked about and discussed and acted upon. We have 13 in the Northeast, and out of those, we have 8 that Fish and Wildlife Services lead for. So it's pretty exciting. We have a lot of good things going on in the Northeast, and it's fun to be able to show a little of that off. We're going to give Rebecca a field trip tomorrow to see some of the good work going on in Fish Passage, too. So we're excited for that opportunity. So with no further ado, I think I'll just give a quick introduction, a little background on Rebecca, and then I'll turn it over to you to talk to us for a little bit. So I had the pleasure of being with Rebecca on May 24th. The Secretary came to Hartford, Secretary Salazar, and some of the local congressmen and senators. Together, they announced the Secretary signed a secretarial order on the National Blueway system. It was very exciting, and that was largely in part due to Rebecca's effort, and we really appreciate that. And Rebecca was able to name the Connecticut River the first ever Blueway. So that was a big event. We got great media, good attention, and it's nice to see that system be recognized for all the years and years of good work. And as you know, it's Silvio Conte Refuge is a big leader in that. I think there's over 40 partners that have been working on that 4-state river system for a long time. I think it's something like 410 miles of river and over 7 million acres. So it's a big system, and it's really exciting to be able to have that attention with a focus on recreation and conservation and bolstering the economy. And so I think the idea is to have blueways recognized across the nation. And Rebecca will talk a little bit more about, I think, that effort as well. But so not only is Rebecca an incredible woman, but she's a huge conservation leader in the U.S., and it's really great to have her as part of the Department of Interior's administration. So Rebecca, in the past, has served as the president and CEO of American Rivers, which I'm sure you're all very familiar with that organization. It's the nation's leading river conservation organization, and you were there from 95, I believe, to 2011. And you successfully directed strategic, programmatic, and financial operations, resulting in an 8-fold increase in revenue, a 4-fold increase in growth in staff, and establishment of more than a dozen field offices delivering conservation services to communities across America. And under your leadership, America Rivers helped dozens of communities transform their rivers from liabilities to assets. Through innovative conservation measures like the creation of river trails, the removal of obsolete and dangerous dams, and the implementation of green infrastructure solutions to safeguard clean water. As we all know, that's really important to us here in the Northeast. Under your direction, the organization developed effective public education and involvement programs such as America's Top 10 Most Endangered Rivers and the National River Cleanup, which you get to see every year. It comes out in the news. That's a big deal when they announce what are the 10 most endangered rivers. Rebecca served as a conservation chair of the National Lewis and Clark Bicentennial Commemoration and played a leadership role in developing the American Heritage Rivers Initiative. And in 2010, she was recognized as in the top 25 outstanding conservationists by Outdoor Life magazine and was named Woman of the Year by the American Sport Fishing Association in 1998. Impressive. From 1981 to 1994, Rebecca served in several different capacities. You were at the Wilderness Society as Vice President for Organizational Development, Vice President for Membership Marketing and Development, and as Director of the Alaska Programs. So prior to that, Rebecca was a legislative assistant to the U.S. Senator Gaylord Nelson in Wisconsin. And during that, she directed recreation and resource. Oh, and before that, you directed a recreation and resource study for the Lower St. Croix. I was there, National Wild and Scenic River for the states of Wisconsin and Minnesota, and the National Park Service. And lastly, Rebecca began her career as an environmental planner for the Leo A. Daly Company, architects, engineers, and planners, preparing environmental impact statements and developing environmental components of large-scale engineering projects. Rebecca holds a BA in biology and a BA in environmental studies from the University of Kansas, graduating with highest distinction. And you also hold an MS in landscape architecture and water resource management from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. We're very happy to have you. Thank you for joining us, and welcome to Region 5 and the great employees that work here. You're just seeing about 200, I was saying we have about 200 people here in the regional office and another 1,000 just about out in the field, so hopefully many of them are joining us here today. It's nice to have you.
Thanks, Wendy. It's terrific to be here. I was up in this region just a couple of weeks ago for, as Wendy said, for the creation of this new National Blueway system and recognizing the Connecticut River as the first National Blueway. And through that, I had a chance to work with some of your colleagues up in this region. I see Marcy Kaplis out in the audience. She was key to the success of that event. And Andy French, of course, was just a rock for the entire effort. So it's been one of the places that I've really enjoyed learning from, working with, and I know I'll get a lot more out of my visit today and tomorrow. So appreciate being up here and having a chance to tell you a little bit about what's going on in the Secretary's office, particularly when it comes to rivers, and then just answer your questions or do the best that I can to try to answer your questions. As Wendy went through my my bio, what you probably heard over and over again was river. There's a river theme, not just because my last name is Wodder, but there's a connection there. And so I have been working on this subject for many, many years, and some people come to river work in different ways. Some people are passionate fly fishermen. Some people are whitewater kayakers. I come to rivers from a more philosophical and holistic perspective. For one thing, I think rivers are just a good medium for conservation, and conservation is something I've been interested in for practically my whole life. So, in one thing about rivers, we have 3.5 million miles of rivers in the country, 250,000 named rivers. Rivers were how we built this country. We explored by rivers. We settled on the banks of rivers. We built our cities and powered our cities and got our drinking water. So rivers have tremendous reach. I mean, just really anywhere that I go in the country, there's going to be a river there. And the river is going to be part of the story of the community that I'm visiting. And so there's always a way to talk about rivers, no matter where I go. And similarly, I can talk about rivers to anyone, because rivers are relevant to all kinds of things. You don't have to be a card-carrying conservationist to care about your river. It's clean water. It's for many communities, it's part of the transportation system. It may provide power. It certainly provides open space and wonderful wildlife habitat. So rivers are relevant to the things that almost anybody cares about. There's some way you can talk to nearly anyone about a river and make it relevant to their lives. And most important of all, rivers are resilient, and that is something I really love about them. One of my favorite memories is going back more than a decade when I was in Augusta, Maine in July of 1999 for the removal of the Edwards Dam on the Kennebec River. That dam had been there for 164 years. Nathaniel Hawthorne wrote about salmon butting their noses into that dam. That just gives you a way to think about how long it had been there. And yet within a season, when that dam had been removed, salmon were back to their prime spawning habitat. The river had recovered, and great things were happening. And so that's really, if of all the things that I love about rivers, I think it's that resilience, that capacity for restoration that gives me a sense of hope. You know, it gives me a sense that even in the face of just all the things that we're up against in the 21st century, that rivers, we give them a little bit of help and they will pay us back through their ability to become restored. So anyhow, those are the kinds of things that have kept me going at this subject all these years, and I think will keep me going for many more, I hope. So I've come to the Department of Interior at the end of a fairly long career already. I'd been in, as Wendi said, I'd been in the conservation movement for 30 years prior to coming to the department. And when I first moved to Washington, I actually was really dream come true to work for Gaylord Nelson. I don't know how many of you are old enough to remember Gaylord, but he was the founder of Earth Day, just a champion of the conservation movement when he was governor in Wisconsin and when he came to the United States Senate and served there for 3 terms. So working for him as his environmental legislative aide was just extremely special and what I think really put me solidly on this course. And so to sort of end up my career now at the department is an equally treasured moment and something I feel very honored and privileged to be working for Secretary Salazar. If there is a bigger champion for rivers in the United States government, I don't know who that would be. He truly believes in the value of rivers and the importance of the job that the Department of the Interior is doing with respect to protecting and restoring and making rivers assets for our communities all across the country, whether we're talking about human communities or wildlife, natural communities. So you all probably know that a couple of years ago, in the spring of 2010, President Obama launched a conservation initiative with a lot of help from Secretary Salazar called America's Great Outdoors, and that's become the signature conservation initiative of this administration. So that was the spring of 2010, and to determine what was going to be part of this initiative, many listening sessions were held across the country. And one of the things that came up time after time after time was how important rivers are to the American communities. And so what happened as a result of all of that groundswell of support is that when the America's Great Outdoors Initiative was sort of stood up and established, it was built on 3 pillars, and one of those 3 pillars is rivers. And I'll just tell you the other two. One of the other two is urban parks, and the third one in this trilogy is large landscapes. But rivers were one of 3 pillars, and so Secretary Salazar, I'm sure, had something to do with that, in addition to all of the citizens who spoke up about rivers. But time passed, and I came to the department last August, and in January of this year, Secretary Salazar decided that he wanted to launch a specific rivers initiative as part of America's Great Outdoors. And so he asked me to do some thinking about that, had me work with a number of colleagues from across the department to think through what it might be. And in January, the very end of January, this was announced. So we've only been in business for a handful of months, but we're moving at a fast pace because we know the clock is short, that we have a lot of work to get done before the end of the year. So we've been at work for a few months now. We have sort of 2 broad areas of endeavor. One is river recreation, making rivers more accessible and making them valued assets to communities. And the second area is river restoration, rivers as habitat, rivers as migration corridors. So those are the 2 sides of the initiative, the recreation side and the restoration side. And it's because rivers have these qualities that I was alluding to moments ago. I mean, they're great ways to connect people to the out of doors. They're close to home for every community. They are great wildlife habitat, and they allow people a chance to get involved, whether they're coming just for a weekend or an afternoon river cleanup, or maybe they're going to get involved in something much larger, like 60 years of effort on the Connecticut River Watershed. People have things that they can do on a volunteer basis or as a public servant to get involved with rivers. So we have a sort of a three-part strategy for this initiative, again, with very short time and very limited resources. We've chosen to focus on doing three kinds of things. One is demonstration projects, highlighting projects that are worthy models, sort of showing the way by picking out some projects around the country. The second thing we want to do is make it easier, find ways through some of the new technology to collect up the tools and services and abilities that are already out there and make it easier for both our own colleagues within the federal family, but also the people we work with at the state and local level and in the grassroots to access the things that we have available to us in the way of technical knowledge and capacities and some grant monies as well. Excuse me. And the third element of this strategy is inspiration, so that we can put these ideas out there through stories and through events and through gatherings, and hopefully give other communities the idea that, hey, we have a river, and maybe we could have some of that good stuff in our community as well. So show the way, make it easier, and inspire involvement. That's sort of the three parts of our strategy. At this point, we've stood up a few program elements. Wendi referred to one. We've picked out a project in each of the 50 states, plus the districts. We have 51 All-American River projects around the country. The way we got these projects is that we asked Fish and Wildlife Service, National Park Service, the Bureau of Land Management, and the Bureau of Reclamation to look across their river-related projects and sort of lift up the ones that they thought would make good models to be these demonstrations of what we're doing and some of the best stuff that we're doing. So we got a lot of nominations from across the country. We had to go through a winnowing process and a selection process because we only had one slot per state. And we tried to get some diversity too. We tried to have different kinds of projects, different kinds of problems that were being attacked. Anyhow, we ended up with 51 projects. And 2 weeks ago, we had our rollout where every day for 5 days, we put out a press release and identified the projects in 5 different regions of the country. So those projects are all out there. Again, they were projects that were nominated by the bureaus, so they're already up and running. We have a leader in each case. We're working with the leader to make sure that we are going to really learn the lessons of these projects, capture what they know, and make it available, share it with others. So that's one part of the work. And within that work, there's lots of, Wendi mentioned 13, 14 programs, projects up here in New England, many of which are being led by the Fish and Wildlife Service, many of which have to do with fish passage. So a lot of what you do is reflected in these projects. We have, so that's one element. A second element, I'm sort of doing these somewhat chronologically. That's how they're occurring to me anyway. We worked with the National Park Service to put out a new and improved program around national water trails. So there have been national water trails as part of the National Recreation Trail system for many, many years. But the Park Service decided, as part of this emphasis in America's Great Outdoors, of emphasis on recreation and conservation, to try to take that program and really upgrade it. And they worked very hard. They identified half a dozen best management practices that they're applying to these trails. They've created, or they're in the process of creating, a community of mentors for the trails. So they're doing a lot of work to sort of make these more valuable, more sustainable, more higher value assets to the communities that are going forward to get a National Water Trail designation. A third element is this new idea of a new, sort of a back to the future, new old idea, I guess, of National Blueway system. This is a new approach to rivers. Most river protection, conservation, recreation programs look at rivers on a segment basis, and they tend to just look at a fairly narrow riparian corridor, maybe a quarter mile on either side of the river. And so when we were looking around to implement the Secretary's vision for rivers, we asked ourselves, what could we come up with that would be truly additive to the options that are currently on the table? And actually, it was the Conti Refuge that inspired us and gave us the concept, gave us the model and the vision of what we wanted to do. So it was right here in this region that we found our idea. And it was with a lot of help from Andy French, by the way, so he also deserves a lot of thanks. But the idea is to look at rivers from headwaters to mouth or confluence, and to look across the watershed of the river, and to approach this from an integrated basis, integrating the land and the water management, and bringing together the practitioners who have responsibility for the land and the water, and trying to get that in a collaborative, integrated approach, and to do it with really strong stakeholder partnerships. Again, the Friends of Conti, which, if you aren't familiar, is an association of more than 40 organizations that are working together, who have come together to talk about how to proceed with the Conti Refuge, 7.2 million acres in terms of the legislated project area. So those are the elements of a National Blueway, that it's watershed-wide, that it's integrated land and water, and that it's community-based and really has an active stakeholder partnership across the watershed. And so we've just announced the system. It's still being developed, constructed, if you will. We went ahead and named the first system, the first Blueway, because, as I said, the Conti is the inspiration for all of this. We hope to have several other pilots around the country, many of which will have Fish and Wildlife Service involvement in other regions. So we want to take the ideas that we've developed here in New England and make sure that they work in the Southeast, in the Northwest, and the West. We're going to be developing an awards program that is at least inspired by the LEED system, if you know LEED, which is a program by which buildings and developments can be judged for their environment and energy quality. And so that's an idea that we won't just lift it entirely, but we'll be looking at that as an inspiration in terms of having criteria in different categories, and having a voluntary self-evaluation process that will lead to a nomination, will be evaluated, and we hope it'll be a very prestigious award that something that communities really want to work to be able to get this award. And we hope that it will certainly come with a lot of high-level support. Secretary Salazar is reaching out to other cabinet secretaries. We hope to have an MOU that goes across a number of the most important partners, certainly Department of Agriculture, Army Corps of Engineers, EPA. So we're hoping that this will be something that will not just be a prestigious award, although that's an important part of it, but that will bring a lot of value to the communities that come together to seek one of these nominations. A couple of other things I'll mention. We are hoping to create a web-based one-stop shop where we collect up tools and services and hopefully a directory of people across the department within the key bureaus who know something about rivers, so that we could have an annotated directory of people who would be good resources when you're working on a project and have a question and are looking for somebody who might have this expertise. And we're also working on developing, again, I mentioned a moment ago around blueways, but more generally developing MOUs with other agencies. I worked on one with the Fish and Wildlife Service again early on, getting an MOU between Agriculture and Commerce and the Department of the Interior for the National Fish Habitat Action Plan. And that was something that we were able to get signed, and hopefully that will do a lot of good in supporting the private-public fish habitat partnerships across the country. So we're working hard to get these kinds of elements stood up, and I can't say for sure what the future of all of this work is going to be. It's a little bit early for me to know that, although if I were here in 2 weeks, I probably would have more of a sense, because the Secretary is giving a lot of thought to how to ensure this work over the long term, and I know those conversations are starting, and so stay tuned. We'll be figuring this out as we go forward. But I think that's probably adequate run through of what we're up to, so I would be glad to try to answer any questions.
Any questions? There's all kinds of great things going on. This is a great opportunity to... Oh, good.
So I do have a question, and that is, I chair a habitat committee in the Chesapeake Bay, and one of the issues that comes up over and over, and I think it kind of fits to your second kind of point, which is make it easier, and that is that people that are doing restoration work are finding it harder and harder to get the permits for doing that kind of restoration. It used to be we got kind of a professional pass to go through and do that kind of work, and again, now it's getting more and more complex, and I know you understand that because you've tried to remove major dams, and so I'm just curious how we move forward on these initiatives when it's again, you have a lot of agencies that have a lot of conflicting interests. I know we found it with like wind power, where you had to almost pre-site it and lay out all the environmental issues first before you could even consider laying something out there. And I wonder if we have to do that even for wetland permits now.
When I came up to Hartford a couple of weeks ago, I flew up with Rock Salt. It's a great name, Rock Salt. He is the Deputy Assistant Secretary of the Army for Civil Works. So he...
It's true.
He is the right hand of Joellen Darcy, who's the Assistant Secretary for the Corps of Engineers. And I don't know if you were thinking about the Corps when you were... not just the Corps, but you know, Rock and I spent the better part of an hour talking about the issue that you raise, and you know, we didn't solve it in an hour, but I will say that I think in him and in Joellen Darcy, we have partners who understand this and who want to make a difference, and that's one of the reasons that we're talking about MOUs. I've got one on my desk right now that actually Rock took the lead in drafting, and so we're going to be working hard to see if we can get this through a three-way signing between us, agriculture, and the Corps. Maybe we ought to be talking with EPA as well, and DOT. I mean, there are many other agencies I know that are key to this question, resolving this question. You know, I agree. It's a big one. But it's achievable. It's just a matter of patience and persistence, and I think right now we have people in the seats who want to see it done. So this is a good opportunity. We'll give it our best shot and see if we can. I don't know that we can solve all the problems, but maybe we can solve. I tend to try to find places where there's low-hanging fruit, where there's something that we can get done. And so maybe there's one permit process that we might be able to resolve, and then use that as an example of the good that can come from working something like that out, and then hopefully that will be replicated into the future.
Who else?
Rebecca, welcome to the region. My name is Bill Oshmo. I'm with the Fisheries Program up here, and we're really excited about this new initiative. We have a lot of programs. You referenced one of them, the NIFHAP program and Fish Passage and so forth. Will we see any of these rolled up into a budget initiative in 2014 to kind of incentivize our folks behind the AGO? We're really excited about it, and having some additional funds will go a long way.
Being a relative newcomer at the department, I'm just sort of being introduced to the intricacies and secrets of the budgeting process. So I certainly am in conversations with policy management and budget. I will also tell you that the Secretary is, I mentioned a few minutes ago that he's interested in what the long-term legacy from all of this work will be, and so he is also looking at the kinds of questions that you just raised. So no promises, and I can't really even predict what the outcome will be, but there is a lot of interest and a lot of conversations going on. And it's not just, certainly not just within Fish and Wildlife Service. I mean, there are 4 bureaus that are involved in this conversation, and one of the interesting parts of all this work is working with Bureau Reclamation, and surprising to me, but there's a passion there for river restoration work. That Mike Connor, who's the Bureau Director, really sees that as the 21st century role of Bureau Reclamation and is really pushing hard on this. So I think that helps also, that it's across several different bureaus. Bureau of Land Management, another place where I've been pleasantly surprised by the level of passion for this kind of work. And certainly the Park Service as well, but I sort of expected it at the Park Service. So it's been really encouraging to see how many people think this is something worth doing.
Who else?
Good afternoon. Welcome. I'm Kenny Lowe with the Science Applications Program, and one of the hats I wear is with the chair of the North Atlantic LCC. And I've been involved in a lot of the America's Great Outdoors kind of initial coordination in this region. And I was wondering if you could help us maybe, and I know the communications are evolving, and there's lots of moving parts to America's Great Outdoors right now. And some of them that we have in northern New England are the large northern forest landscape. We have the 50-state projects, of which we have many in this region that we're lead for, and now the Blueways and now the 50 river projects. Maybe you can help us evolve an effective communication to our partners, because, as you said before, the community part of this is so essential to getting things done on the ground, and a better understanding of how these parts fit together within America's Great Outdoors would be helpful as we go along. Do you have any thoughts on that today? I know it's still evolving, but love to hear your thoughts.
I have a few thoughts, Kenny. I'm not sure if I have a nice comprehensive answer for you, but I have a few thoughts. Maybe just start with a little story. Just you mentioned the Northern Forests LCC, and not too long ago, I was part of a conference call between the Green Mountain and White Mountain National Forests and some of the USDA people in Washington and Conti Refuge and others, and we were looking at the overlap between the Connecticut River Watershed, i.e. the Conti Refuge, and the Northern Forest LCC, and part of top third of the Connecticut River Watershed is in that zone. And we were having just this conversation about how not to confuse people, how not to wear them out. And what came out of that conversation, which was a combination of people on the ground and people in Washington, was an agreement that we were going to take the Upper Connecticut Watershed component and integrate it into this Conti Refuge Connecticut River Watershed National Blueway element. And so, I guess I just tell that story to say we recognized it, we talked about it, a consensus decision, and I hope that will serve us well going forward. I'm puzzled oftentimes because I see these large landscape efforts, and I think in large landscapes all the time. They're called watersheds, and so I think that this is a good, perhaps not a stated objective of this work, but the intersection between land and water. I think that's part of the contribution here. This isn't just about rivers. It's really about land and water and how those things work together. So I think that's maybe initially extra confusion, but I hope over the longer term something that makes more sense ecologically and hopefully makes more sense in terms of spending taxpayer dollars wisely, working on a watershed basis, because that's so much of what happens in terms of water supply and pollution and stormwater and all the things that are happening on a watershed basis. And then, in terms of just communicating more clearly, I think that's something we need to do. I discovered, much to my horror, that the website for America's Great Outdoors is just completely out of date, and it's like it was stood up and then forgotten. So now we're working to try to rectify that, and we have, thanks to some help from people in communications, just developed a map that has clickable buttons for all of 51 river projects. So we're hoping to get the information just more clearly and easily accessible. So there's a lot of, I think, a lot of recognition of the problem that you're raising, and some efforts in the right direction, and hopefully we'll keep doing stakeholder outreach to explain ourselves to our partners and find ways that this really does provide value. And if it provides value, then I think we'll be in a good place.
Hi, my name is Christine Biergard. I'm here with the contracting office, but I am also on a conservation commission in my town, and there's always a lot more work to be done communicating with the public on a one-on-one basis. And I was wondering if you could elaborate a little bit more on your Blueway project, of what your local towns, how you can connect with them, and if there are grants that they can apply for, because one of our little villages is actually called Three Rivers. So it's a very valuable asset for us locally.
Christina, right? Yeah. I'm struggling a little bit to answer your question, because one of the issues that we have not nailed down yet around about the National Blueway system is the size of the watershed that we're going to be aiming at. But we're sort of aiming at larger watersheds rather than smaller watersheds, at least right now. And so, our first one was 7.2 million acres, 410-mile river. That's a big, like Huck 4, Huck 6 kind of a watershed. And if we're talking at the town level, of course, even if you're talking about a watershed, you're going to be talking about, very small, I'm sure. And so right now the Blueways system is really designed for communities of communities, watershed-wide partnerships. So I think that initially, at least, the goals are going to be to bring many communities together to create a vision for what that watershed, how that watershed can be more resilient, and hopefully the benefits then to the communities like the ones you're talking about in terms of better protection from floods and droughts and cleaner water and higher quality outdoor space and recreation, and then that breeds hopefully jobs and tourism. I mean, it'll be, I think, probably pretty indirect, at least in its first iteration for a smaller community. But we are, one of the things that Reclamation suggested to us, there's a program called Cooperative Watershed Management Program. Right now it's just a reclamation program, but it gives out small grants at the community level for communities that want to get into watershed planning. And given that it's reclamation right now, it's only available in the West. But we're hoping that this is an idea that might get picked up and made nationwide. And that would be small $5,000, $10,000 grants to communities that want to start thinking about their river in a watershed way. So stay tuned. I hope there will be something for your size community in the future.
Hi, Rebecca. We have a great field audience today. There's probably at least 40 folks out there at a minimum, and one of them has a question for you. I was wondering what the biggest challenging aspect of river restoration would be. What's your biggest challenging aspect of river restoration?
Biggest challenging. I guess it's resources. There's so much interest, I think, in river restoration, and really a lot of ability to do it at so many different levels. So I think it's just the fact that we're short on resources. In answering the question, I come back to the permit point that we were talking about earlier. Oh, I've got one, thanks. Maybe Wendi would like it. And the fact that we oftentimes, take a step forward and then two steps back when we're trying to solve a problem with in a hurry. I'm thinking about the work that's being done up here after Hurricane or Tropical Storm Irene, and there are very few dollars to fix these road crossings, but we're fixing them too often in a way that's just going to fail again. And in an era with very limited resources at every level, from federal down to the local government, to use those dollars in a way that isn't going to stand the test of time just seems tragic. And so I think just finding the resources to do the job is certainly no shortage of people who love rivers, who want to get involved in this work. There's a lot of knowledge, and it's growing all the time. I mean, we have a lot of things going for us, but we're probably most limited by resources.
Any other questions? Comments?
Hi, Rebecca. Paul Pajak in the Fisheries Program. I think we've probably had parallel careers. It seems like we've woven our way through all the same initiatives. But as you were summarizing, the Blueways initiative, it was really reminiscent for people who've been around for a while. The whole American Heritage Rivers initiative, a lot of the same recurring interdisciplinary themes, landscape level. I guess as you sort of flip through the folders of that kind of history, as you strategize moving forward, what would you say are sort of the salient pieces of the Blueways strategy that would remain the same? And maybe what do you see as maybe some of the biggest strategies that we need to pursue, especially in light of the economy and the shortage of resources, to create what's that big value-added strategy that we need out there, I guess, to build on what worked with the American Heritage Rivers, but what we need to do, because obviously it's not around anymore.
Yeah. And I actually was fairly involved in American Heritage Rivers, so I do know that story. There's some similarities, but I think there are a lot of differences as well. I would, when I said back to the future in terms of the description of the National Blueway system, I was really thinking about sort of every 40 years, every generation, we seem to have a real push on watersheds. Whether it's river basin commissions or we sort of rediscover this idea of watersheds, every generation, and realize how powerful that concept is from a strategic point of view. So I would say that the key elements, I've mentioned some of them already, but it's the general idea is that when we design our built environment in ways that either mimic natural systems and natural forces or work with the natural systems, we're going to have a better result. It's going to be a better use of scarce resources. It might cost more in the beginning, but it's going to be more flexible and more resilient and sustainable. And so these solutions are going to have better value to taxpayers, particularly now that we're facing more frequent extreme weather conditions, whether that's too much rain or not enough. I think systems that work with the natural dynamics are going to be more flexible. I am familiar with work that's being done in Philadelphia, and they're attacking they've got a combined sewer overflow problem there, and they were talking about spending $3 billion to put in a deep tunnel, as was done in Chicago. By the way, the Chicago tunnel overflowed the first time it rained there because they had a big event and their engineers hadn't planned on that. But instead of going for $3 billion in a deep tunnel, which the mayors, they're going for a green infrastructure, a natural infrastructure. It's going to cost them $1 billion, so they're going to have $2 billion to spend on teachers and firemen and police. And as the mayor said, you really can't tailgate on a deep tunnel. They're going to have a much more livable community, and so there's multiple benefits that come from these natural approaches. So that to me, that the idea of a blueway system is a system that as I said, it's on the watershed level. It looks at the whole river. It integrates land and water in a way that respects and works with the natural forces. It's about bringing communities together because these are long-term efforts and multi-party efforts, and hopefully we can make it a sufficiently prestigious award that it'll be worth something to the communities that are able to come together. One of the things that we were talking about is having a Blueways Award at 3 stages. At the vision stage, and then the plan stage, and then the implementation stage. So recognizing that you can't get to things like this in a short amount of time, you first have to bring the entire watershed together around a vision. And why is that vision going to be attractive to parts of the community that maybe don't care about fish and wildlife habitat, but maybe do care a lot about how much it costs to provide sanitary and storm sewer services. So that's not a very crisp answer to your question, but it's sort of the direction that I think we need to head. Yeah.
Anyone else? Liz.
Hi, I'm Liz. Can you hear me? Yeah, I'm Liz Dawson. I'm actually in the engineering group here, but I just had a general thought. It just seems like Blueway is a very catchy name for this whole thing, and I just wanted to compliment you or whoever thought of that. I think it's really great, and I hope that helps you with getting this thing mobilized.
Liz? Yeah, thanks, Liz. I don't think I'm going to claim credit for it. I think it's a lot of people contributed to the idea of that name, but I do think that it's a catchy name, and I think if we're going to do things like large landscapes, that's a mouthful. So we need a catchy name, and maybe Blueways and Greenways. I don't know, but I hope something like that will start to mean something to the public as years go by.
Thank you. I'm Megan Nagel. I'm with Science Applications, And so speaking of the public, and I think you've kind of, for me, laid out my general question, which is, what is a blueway? So we talked about vision and planning and implementation, but if we're talking to the public about a blueway, which is a great name, and it's what's the simplest way for me to explain to like my parents or my neighbor why it's so exciting that we have the Connecticut River as the first blueway in the country?
Well, I mean, I think maybe the simplest way for the average person to think about it is it's a river from source to sea, from headwaters to, I mean, not all rivers flow to the sea, obviously, but source to sea is, I think, a simple way to think about it. So it's the entire river, the whole river, and its watershed. That's what a blueway is. And the other things that are critical to getting this designation is that it's a partnership of all the stakeholders within the watershed coming together to start to create integrated land and water management, to have a healthy river system. So I think the first part of that is probably the shortest piece, but then to get beyond that, some of those other aspects are important, and hopefully that will suffice for you.
Yes, thank you.
It was fun at the Connecticut River dedication. There were so many people there from different backgrounds and different interests, and so it was really fun to be able to even see that initial event catch so many people, you know, whether they were there for the paddling or the clean water or for conservation or restoration, or they were a local business owner that wanted to be able to use that as a marketing tool to bring more people in or contributing towards a cleaner. It was really fun. So I think we can really communicate that in different ways depending on our audiences too. So.
I have another comment, and something you said a minute ago. The intersection between, say, the Northern Forest Landscape Plan and the Connecticut River, and the fact that 4 states identified the Connecticut River as part of their 50-state projects. One of the things that's exciting to me is that you've recognized the Connecticut River first, and that's very significant because here in the Northeast, I think we have a very different kind of conservation solution necessary, and you alluded to it a minute ago when you're talking about communities, and Megan was talking about it a little bit, this idea that we have small, broken-up landscapes that are pretty messy to deal with in the long term for conservation solutions, but it's necessary to deal with it that way if we're going to get anything done. So we've through things like the Connie Refuge and many other collaborative projects going on in the Northeast, we've kind of gone at it from that angle of involving lots of communities, lots of private landowners, lots of incentives, and big vision, and tried to assemble a conservation solution in that light that's very different from some Western states that have huge federal ownerships or large ranches or opportunities that are very different than we have here in the East. So it's very exciting for me that you've recognized the Northeast in kind of a leading an effort like this, because it's so central to so many of the conservation solutions that we have to put on the ground here. So thank you.
For giving us the chance to learn from you.
Probably have time for maybe one more question, comment. Everybody good? Well, this is, again, I want to take this opportunity to thank you for taking time with us. These are excellent, what we call initiatives, but I hope they're not initiatives. I hope they are long-standing. I hope they're a way of doing business from here out into the future. And I've had the pleasure of being with the Secretary the last couple of weeks at several events, and each time he says, now, how are we going to keep this around, even when I'm long gone? How is this going to be a legacy that we leave? And so I ask all of you to think about that. These are really important efforts, and it does bring attention finally. We're all focused at this large landscape level approach to conservation, and we have so many different constituents that we serve in our role as Fish and Wildlife Service employees. And I think there's probably multiple ways of answering that question. How do we leave this legacy? But each and every one of you, no matter what program you're in, no matter what pay grade you're in, all have a role in the Fish and Wildlife Service towards this mission and leaving this legacy. And this is just one aspect. But between blueways and greenways and large landscape conservation, we all can be leaving the legacy by either being the communicators or getting our hands and feet dirty in the dirt, doing the actual work, or whether it's letting a contractor helping get IT services done so folks can get the message out. I mean, every one of us play a role. So I ask each and every one of you to think, how do we leave the legacy? How do we each play an important part in being members of the Blueway Initiative or the Blueway, the Rivers Initiative, or how are we all going to keep America's great outdoors alive? So thank you very much for being here. It's an absolute pleasure, and thank you all for your time today. It's great.